For this video, you will need your notes page that I gave you from your packet, right? So that looks like this. Today in class, we filled out at least the first two boxes under the percent proportion and the percent equation. Oh wait, just a refresher on what we talked about in class. The first tool is the percent proportion. And what you need to write in your box, if you hadn't already, is this part here and this part here. So in this box, you should have written, use the guide fraction of part over whole, and you will need to use the percent as a fraction. So what does that look like? So say you have 60%, you would want to write it as 60 over 100. Alright. We also talked about using the percent equation. For the percent equation, you will want to write part is percent of whole. And basically, is the equal sign, and of means multiplying. So whatever we have, we're going to fill it in with what we know. We also know that for this, we are going to use the percent. You guys can't see that on the screen, so I'm going to write it up here. Use the percent as a decimal. So what does that mean? Well, if you have 60%, you would write it as 0.6. So say we're saying, hey, 6 is 60% of x. So times x. Alright, why don't we try some examples? So in this example, it says a student got 80% on a 35-point test. The student got 20 points. Well, let's think about what that actually means on the graph. If right here, this is our percent, and this is our test. The percent is 0 out of 100%. And on this it says they got an 80%. So if we kind of estimate, this would be kind of 50%, and 80 would be kind of like right here. This is 80%, and I can erase this. So what we're looking for are either the part or the whole. And if we look here, it says on a 35-point test. So this keyword on, that kind of tells us that this is going to be our whole test. So a 35-point test. And it says we want to find how many points the student got. So we're trying to find how many points out of the whole test of 35 they're trying to get. Okay, so what would be our percent equation? Well, we're trying to find the part, right? So if we remember, the percent question is part is percent of whole, right? So we know that part, we don't know that actually. So we're going to write what, because the part, we don't know, that's our x, is, we know 80% of, and we know the whole test is 35. So this is our part, this is our whole, and this is our percent. So what is 80% of 35? That is our percent question. Okay, so now we're going to use the two strategies. We're going to use the percent proportion. So I'm going to do the proportion over here. You don't have to write this word. And I'm going to do the equation over here. So if you look back at your notes, you'll see that the percent equation, we're actually going to use the guide fraction of part over whole. So in this case, we know if our first fraction is our percent, we know that it's 80% and the whole amount is 100%. And now what we're trying to find is we don't know the part, but we do know that 100% on the test is going to be 35. Okay? And this is where we need to remember how to solve proportions. What we're going to do is we're going to use the butterfly method. So we are going to do 80 times 35. And if I put that in the calculator, I get 2,800. And now I'm going to do the other side. I'm going to do 100 times x, which gives me 100x. Okay? So now I have a one-step equation. And remember, how do we solve that? We're going to draw a line down the equal sign. And now we're going to multiply each side by the multiplicative inverse of 100 over 1. So the multiplicative inverse of 100 over 1 is 1 over 100. So we're going to do that to each side. Okay, remember we have to draw the 1 underneath. And now these cancel each other out, and I'm left with x on this side. And on this side, I have to multiply straight across, so I get 2,800 over 100. And now if I put that in my calculator, I do 2,800 divided by 100. That gives me 28 is equal to x. So to answer this question, the student got 28 questions on the test. Okay, so let's look at our graph here. Does it make sense that 28 is pretty close to 35? It's kind of like 80%. All right, let's try another one. All right, over here I have my percent equation. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to write down my percent question again. And I have what is 80% of 35. Okay? And now I'm going to fill in stuff that I know. So, for example, what? We don't know what. That's going to be my x. So I have x, and then is means an equal. And then 80%, we're going to have to write that in fraction form. So let's do 80. We're going to move the decimal from the right over to the left 2 places. And so my decimal is 0.8. Okay, so of means to multiply. And then I'm going to drop down this 35. And now all I have to do is put in the calculator 35 times 0.8. And you guys don't have to do it on the over here. You can just multiply. And what you get is actually equal to 28 points. So I want you to notice that we get the same answer using the proportion and the equation. It's just 2 different strategies to solve the same problem. You are welcome to use either strategy. I personally will use the equation strategy, but you can always use the proportion. It says a student got 27 questions correct out of 60. What percent is this? So we're trying to find the percent. So let's look at what this would look like. So if my top arrow represents my percent, and my bottom arrow represents my test. Okay, so I know that percent is out of 100%. So 100% is my whole amount. And my corresponding whole from my example is, I know it talks about 27 out of 60. So since there's this of 60, that's going to be my whole amount. That's 100% of the test. Okay, and now I need to graph this 27 questions. Well, I know that half of 60 is 30. So if I were to estimate where 27 would be, it would be right under 50%. So I'm going to estimate it right here. So it's going to be kind of right there. Now if we think about it, I just said that it's going to be right below 50%. So we know that our percent is going to be less than 50%. Let's try and write a percent question. Okay, so if I think about my part is percent of whole, what am I missing? In this case, I know that my percent is 27. I know that my whole is 60. So that means that I'm missing my percent. So I'm just going to rewrite this as 27 is what percent of 60? And that's my question. Okay, so right now we're going to use our proportion. I'm going to use my guide fraction of part over whole. And you do need to write all of this down. So, in this case, we're trying to find our percent. That's my x value. So this here is my part, and this is my whole. So this is my part, and this is my whole. Okay, so now if I were to set up, this first fraction has to be my percent. So in this case, I actually don't know what my percent is, but I do know it's always going to be out of 100 for percent. And then if I talk about my test, it's going to be 27 is my part and 60 is my whole. Okay, so now we have to solve the proportion. We can use the heart method or the butterfly method, and we do 60 times 100 to get 60 times x to get 60x. And now we can do 100 times 27, and if I put that in the calculator, I get 2700. Okay. At this time, I need to multiply each side by the multiplicative inverse of 60, which would be 1 over 60. I'm going to multiply that each side, and I get x is equal to 2700 over 60. Alright, and if I put that in the calculator, I get 45%. Alright, so now if I go over to my equation, I'm going to write my percent question down. I have 27 is what percent? So instead of writing what percent, I'm actually going to write x. 27 is x of 60. And now if I were to write my percent equation, I'm just going to write down what I know. I know that 27 is 27, and that is means equal. And I'm going to drop down my x. Of means to multiply, and then times 60. Okay? This one here looks a little bit different because because I need to get x by itself, which means that I have to use the multiplicative inverse. So I'm going to have to multiply each side by 1 over 60. Okay, so these cancel each other out, and I'm now left over here with 1 over 60 times 27 over 1. So now I have 27 over 60 is equal to x. if I put that in my calculator, I'm going to draw that right up here, I actually get 0.45. But remember how we talked about in the proportion? You have to use the percent as a fraction. Now, since we are finding the percent, we actually have to convert it to a percent. So this is actually our percent value in decimal form. So we're going to move the decimal over 2 places. And now the student got 45% on their test. Guys, if you look at your high school grading packet, what grade did this student get? They got an F. Alright, let's try another example. On this example, it says a student got 40 questions correct on a test which was 91%. So if you look on your grading system, what's a 91%? Okay, check on your paper. Yes, it's an A minus. Okay, so let's graph this out. If my top one is my percent, and my bottom one is my test, I know that a percent is out of 100, so my whole amount is 100%. And what else I know is that there was 91%. So 91 is going to be pretty close to 100. So I'm just going to put it like right there, 91%. Okay. Okay, so now I have to figure out this 40. Is this 40 talking about the part or the whole? Well, the hint here is that it's talking about questions that they got correct. Okay, that is our hint that it's actually the part. So our 40 is going to go here, and we're looking for how many questions the test was. I also know that since they got a 91%, 100% of the test is actually going to be pretty close to 40. Okay? Alright. So, let's write our percent question. In this case, I know my part. So I know 40, that's my part, is 91% is percent of, okay. And in this case, we do not know our whole amount of the test. So 40 is 91% of what? Okay. So our what is our whole. Alright, let's try our percent proportion. I'm going to use the guide fraction of part over whole. And I'm going to set it up with my part of the percent. In this case, it's 91. And the whole amount of my percent is 100. Okay, now I'm going to talk about my test. The part of the test was 40 questions correct. And the whole of my test is unknown. I don't know what that is. So now I'm going to use the butterfly method or the heart method. I'm going to multiply 91 times x, and I get 91x. Okay? Now I have to multiply 100 times 40, and I get 4,000. Alright, now I need to try to get x by itself. So to get x by itself, I'm going to use the multiplicative of 91. And the multiplicative inverse of 91 is 1 over 91. So I'm going to multiply each side by 1 over 91. So on this side I get 4,000 over 91. And this here is just a fraction, and fraction means division. So if I were to divide that, I would get 43.956. Wait, what? Does that make sense? Well, aren't I trying to find the whole amount? Shouldn't that be a nice easy number? You're right, it should be a nice easy number. So we're going to talk about x is equal to 44 questions. Okay? So I know that since I got a weird decimal, that this percent must have been rounded, okay? Because on a test, I'm not going to give you, hey, you got 89.7526%. I'm just going to round up to 90%, right? Let's see if we get the same thing using the equation. Question is, I'm just going to rewrite this. So I have 40 is 91% of, and I'm going to use my variable in this case, which is x. 40 is 91% of x, right? And now I can write my equation. I have 40 equals, oh, and now I have to write this as a decimal, which means it's going to be 0.91 times x, right? And I want to get x by itself, so I'm going to draw a line down the equal sign, and I'm going to use the multiplicative inverse of 0.91, which is actually 1 over 0.91, okay? So in this case, multiplicative inverses actually can have a decimal. So we're going to multiply 1 over 0.91 on each side. So this gives me 40 divided by 0.91 is equal to x. So if I were to put that in my calculator, and you guys can, and I do 40 divided by 0.91, I get 43.95. Guess what? That's the same that I used to get. So I had 40 over 0.91 is equal to x. And if I divide that, I get 43.956, which rounds to 44 questions. For question 4, I am actually going to let you guys try it, okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to try this question on your own. And what I also want you to look at specifically example 1. So this is going to be similar to example 1. I want you to try it, and then you're going to confirm your answer with me. So you can pause this and write this one on your paper, and then check your answer with mine. Did you pause it? Are you listening? All right. Let's try it. And we know 78%, and we know that they got a 78 on a 90-point test. So if our first one is our percent, from 0 to 100%, and we know we got 78, which is going to be kind of like a quarter because it's really close to 75. And then we have our test, and we need to find either the whole or the part. So on this one, it says on. That's a key word that this is going to be your whole amount. So this is going to be 90, and we're looking for x. Okay, so our percent question is actually going to be what is 78% of 90? Right? So using my percent proportion, I have part over whole, which means I have 78% out of 100 is equal to x over 90, right? Because I am looking for my part. These are my parts. These are the top numbers, and these are the bottom numbers. Because these are my parts, and these are my wholes. Okay, let's solve this. We're going to use a cross-hart method. So I have 78 times 90 to give me 7,020. And then I have 100 times x, which gives me 100x. I'm going to multiply each side by 1 over 100, which is the multiplicative inverse. And now I have 7,020 divided by 100 is equal to x. If I were to divide that, I get, and I'm going to write it off to the side because I kind of ran out of room, 70.2. Okay, so this person got 70.2 questions correct. Okay, in this case, it's we can kind of assume that we had to round the fraction again. They probably just got 70 questions correct, or they got partial credit on something. Let's try the equation. All right, the equation is x is 78% of 90. Right, we're going to fill in our variable. We have x and we have equals. 78 has to be in decimal form, so I'm going to move the decimal over twice. So I get 0.78. And then of means to multiply 90. And now I'm going to put this into my calculator. I'm going to say 0.78 times 90. So I'm going to say, let's see, 0.78 times 90. Right? And my answer is 70.2. So my answer here is 70.2 questions correct. All right, for question 5, we are actually going to skip this one. This one you can try on your own, but I think I've done enough examples that you kind of get the idea. And we're going to go to one more example, example 6. Okay, example 6 on your paper is going to be this last example. So, we have a student got 23 points on a 20-point test. What was the percent? Ooh, this looks a little bit different. We have our percent right here and our test right here. I know that a percent is out of 100%. Okay, and now this is where I have to look at the question pretty carefully. It says 23 points on a 20-point test. So they got more points than what the points were. 100%, this word on kind of tells us that 100% was 20 points. Okay? So if I were to estimate that on my number line, well, 23 would be bigger than 20. And this is kind of throws people because you're like, what? It can't be bigger than 100%. Can you guys think of situations that a person could get more points on a test? Like they could get more than 100%? Yeah, there could have been some extra credit questions. Just like on this past interim, there were 17 total questions and one of them was extra credit. Okay, so now we're trying to find what percent 23 is of 20. So let's write our percent question. We know that our part is percent of whole. So what do we know here? We know that we need to find what percent. So I know that that's what I'm going to put my what as. And now I have to figure out, well, which one's my part and which one's my whole. The one that is attached to 100% is always going to be your whole. Even though the part is bigger than the whole, whatever is equal to 100%, that's going to be your whole. So in this case, our whole is 20 points. Okay? That means that the 23 is our part. So we have 23 is what percent of 20? So let's use our percent proportion for that. If I set up my guide fraction of part over whole, I know that my first fraction is going to be my percents. So I actually don't know what my part of my percent is. So I have x over 100 is equal to 23 over 20. Remember that this 23 is the part. So now I can use solving my proportion. I have 20 times x is equal to 20x. And now I have 100 times 23, which gives me 2300. And I can solve for x. In this case, I'm going to multiply by 1 over 20, which is the multiplicative inverse. So these cancel each other out. And over here, I have to do the same, because what I do to one side of the equation, I have to do to the other. So now I have x is equal to 2300 over 20. And if I were to divide this on my calculator, I get 115%. Okay, does that make sense? Since 23 is bigger than 20, that my percent is going to be over 100. So if I look here, we just found out that x is equal to 115%. Yes, that's going to be bigger than 100. Let's use our percent equation. We have 23 is x of 20. So 23 equal x times 20. We're going to draw our number line, my line between down the equal sign. I'm going to multiply each side by 1 over 20. My multiplicative inverse. Okay, so now I have 23 over 20 is equal to x. If I divide that, I get x is equal to 1.15. And remember, we're looking for what the percent is. So I need to convert my decimal into my percent. So I'm going to move my decimal over 2 places to the right. And now I get 115% on my test. What grade is that? That is an A. Okay, so now that you guys have this, you should have written all of these notes on your paper. You just need to take a picture of both sides and submit it, and that's your first e-learning day.